The envelope arrived at Buckingham Palace on a Tuesday morning in January 2026. It was unmarked, sealed with red wax, and addressed to no one. The junior guard who found it tucked beneath the iron gate didn't know what to do with it, so he did what protocol demanded. He brought it to his superior. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten, unsigned. It contained just 7 words: "The king has chosen. Family pays the price." Within an hour, every senior officer in the royal guard had read it. Within 2 hours, it reached King Charles himself. He sat in his private study, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. His face went pale, not with fear, but with recognition, because he knew exactly what it meant. 3 days earlier, Charles had made a decision no one outside the palace walls knew about yet, a decision that would rewrite centuries of royal tradition. He had signed a new directive, a confidential instruction to the royal guard. It was titled simply, Protocol Revision 2026. The instruction was clear, blunt, almost cold. In any situation where the safety of the crown was at risk, guards were to prioritize the monarch above all others, even above the royal family, even above his own sons, even above his grandchildren. It was a return to the old way, the ancient way, the way kings ruled when the throne mattered more than the man who sat on it. Charles had his reasons. The world was changing. Threats were evolving. Intelligence reports showed increasing risks, not from armies or assassins with guns, but from coordinated attacks, cyber warfare, and unpredictable lone actors. The crown, he believed, had to survive above all else. If he fell, the institution could continue. But the institution had to be protected first. He thought the instruction would remain secret, buried in classified files, a contingency plan that would never be tested. He was wrong. Now, someone knew. Someone had leaked it. Or worse, someone had been watching. Waiting, Charles stood and walked to the window. Outside, the guards stood in perfect formation, faces stern, eyes forward, loyal, or so he thought. He pressed a button on his desk. A moment later, his private secretary entered, a man named Geoffrey, pale, nervous, always nervous. "Your Majesty? I want to know who sent this," Charles said, holding up the letter. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "I want to know how they knew, and I want to know by tonight." Geoffrey nodded and disappeared. But Charles already suspected the truth. It wasn't an outsider. It couldn't be. The directive had been shared with only 12 people, all of them trusted, all of them sworn to secrecy. One of them had broken that oath, and if they were willing to break silence, what else were they willing to do? That evening, Charles did something unusual. He walked the palace grounds alone. No guards, no attendants, just him and the cold January air. He needed to think, to breathe. But as he turned a corner near the east wing, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure, standing in the shadows, watching him. Before he could react, the figure stepped forward into the light. It was one of his own guards, a young man, maybe 30, face expressionless. "Your Majesty," the guard said quietly, "we need to talk." Charles felt his heart pound, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. "About what?" he asked. The guard's eyes didn't waver. "About what happens when protocol and family collide. If you're hooked and want to see how this story unfolds, make sure you're subscribed. You won't want to miss what happens next." Charles took a slow breath. "Go on." The guard reached into his jacket. Charles tensed. But what emerged wasn't a weapon. It was another letter, folded, worn. "This was delivered to the guardhouse this morning," the young man said. "It's addressed to you, but it's written by someone you trust." Charles took it, opened it, and the moment he read the first line, everything changed. Asterisk the letter was from his younger son. Not an official correspondence, not a formal note. This was personal, raw, written in haste. "Father, I know what you've done. I know about the new protocol. And I need you to understand something. If you truly believe the crown matters more than the people who wear it, then you've already lost what makes it worth protecting. I won't let my children grow up knowing their grandfather valued a title over their lives. We need to talk. Tonight alone, please." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Charles folded the letter slowly. His hands were steady now, calmer than they'd been all day. He looked at the young guard standing before him. "Who else has seen this?" Charles asked. "Only me, sir. I was told to deliver it personally." "To no one else? By whom?" The guard hesitated. Then, quietly, "Your son, Your Majesty." "He came to the guardhouse himself." Charles nodded. He dismissed the guard with a wave of his hand and stood alone in the cold. His breath came out in clouds. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint sounds of London. Cars, voices, life moving forward. Unaware of the fracture forming inside these palace walls, he had always known this moment might come. The moment when duty and love would stand on opposite sides of a line he'd drawn himself. He just hadn't expected it so soon at 8 o'clock that night. Charles sat in a private room in the south wing. No attendants. No guards at the door. Just him and a single chair across from his. The door opened. His son stepped inside. The younger man looked tired. Older than his years, his face carried the weight of a father himself now. Someone who understood what it meant to protect a child they didn't embrace. They didn't smile. They simply sat. "He read the letter," his son said. "It wasn't a question." "I did." And Charles leaned back in his chair. "You have to understand the position I'm in. The threats we face aren't like they used to be. This isn't about swords and shields anymore. It's coordinated. It's fast. And if something happens, the guards need clear instructions. They can't hesitate. So you told them to let us die." "I told them to protect the crown. We are the crown, Father." His son's voice rose slightly. Not in anger, in desperation. "Me, my brother, your grandchildren. We carry it forward. If you strip away the family, what's left? A chair? A title? A symbol with no soul?" Charles didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his hands. Hands that had signed 1,000 documents. Hands that had worn the ring of kings. Hands that had held his sons when they were small. "I'm trying to protect the future," he said quietly. By sacrificing the present, the silence between them was thick, heavy. Then his son leaned forward. His voice dropped. "There's something you need to know. The letter you received this morning, the anonymous one. It wasn't from an outsider." Charles looked up sharply. "What?" "It was from someone inside the guard, someone who disagrees with your order. And they're not alone." Charles felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "How many?" "I don't know, but enough that they're organizing. Quietly. They're calling it a conscience protest. They're saying that if they're forced to choose between you and your family in a real crisis, they won't follow the protocol. They'll follow their hearts." Charles stood abruptly. "That's mutiny. It's loyalty, Father. To the right thing, they swore an oath. So did you. To your family. To your people. Not to a piece of paper." Charles walked to the window. Outside, the palace lights glowed against the dark sky. Somewhere out there, men and women in uniform were questioning him, doubting him, maybe even planning to defy him. He had created this. With one signature, one decision. "What do you want me to do?" Charles asked, his back still turned. His son stood, walked to his side. "Rescind the order, publicly. Show them that you're a king who leads with love, not fear." Charles turned to face him. "And if I don't?" His son's expression hardened. Sadness filled his eyes. "Then you'll prove that the crown is just a symbol, and symbols can be replaced." The words hung in the air like smoke. Charles knew what his son was implying. Not rebellion, not treason, but something quieter. A slow withdrawal. A distancing. The kind of fracture that wouldn't break the monarchy in a day, but would hollow it out over years. He thought of his grandchildren. their faces, their laughter, the way they looked at him not as a king, but as a grandfather. "I need time," Charles said. "You don't have time," his son replied. "The guards are already talking. The press will find out. And when they do, this becomes a scandal, a crisis, and you'll be forced to act anyway. But it won't be on your terms." Charles closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of the crown not as power, but as a burden. "Leave me," he said quietly. "I need to think." His son hesitated, then nodded. He walked to the door, paused, turned back. "But I love my children more, and I won't apologize for that." Then he was gone. Charles stood alone. The room felt colder now, emptier, and for the first time since he'd taken the throne, he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Charles didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, staring at the directive he'd signed just days ago. The words looked different now, colder, harsher, like they'd been written by someone else, but they hadn't been. They were his. At 4 a.m, Geoffrey knocked softly and entered. His face was drawn. He carried a folder. "Your Majesty, you asked me to investigate the leak. I have findings." Charles gestured for him to sit. Geoffrey opened the folder and slid a single photograph across the desk. It showed a man in uniform, mid-40s, strong jaw, kind eyes. Charles recognized him immediately. "Captain Edmund Terence," Geoffrey said quietly. 20 years of service, decorated, trusted. He's the one who sent the first letter. Charles stared at the photo. "Why? He has a daughter. 8 years old. She was at an event last year where your grandson was present. There was a security scare. A man tried to breach the perimeter. The guards responded immediately. They formed a wall around your grandson. Captain Terrence's daughter was standing 5 feet away, alone, unprotected." Charles felt his chest tighten. Was she hurt? No, but Terence never forgot. He said in his statement that he realized in that moment what the protocol truly meant, that some lives matter more than others, and he couldn't accept it. Statement. He confessed. Geoffrey nodded. "He came forward voluntarily this evening. He said he wanted you to know the truth, that he wasn't acting out of malice, but out of principle." Charles leaned back. "Where is he now?" "In holding, awaiting your decision." Charles closed his eyes. Terence had broken protocol, had leaked confidential information. By law, by tradition, by every rule that governed the monarchy, he should be dishonorably discharged, possibly prosecuted. But Charles couldn't stop thinking about that 8-year-old girl, standing alone, unprotected, while the guards surrounded a prince. "I want to speak with him," Charles said. Geoffrey blinked. "Your Majesty, that's highly unusual. I don't care. Bring him to me now." 20 minutes later, Captain Terence stood in the study. He was still in uniform, though his insignia had been removed. His face was calm, resigned. He didn't look like a man expecting mercy. Charles studied him in silence, then spoke. "You betrayed my trust." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You leaked a classified directive." "Yes, and you organized others to oppose it." Terence hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Why didn't you come to me directly?" For the first time, emotion flickered across Terence's face. "Because I didn't think you'd listen, sir. Men like me don't get audiences with kings. We follow orders. We salute. We serve. But we don't get to question your questioning now, because someone has to." Terence's voice was steady, but there was fire beneath it. "Your Majesty, I've served you faithfully for 2 decades. I've stood in the rain. I've missed birthdays. I've put my life on the line, and I've done it gladly, because I believed in what the crown represents. Honor, duty, protection. But this directive, it's not protection, it's abandonment." Charles felt anger rising. "You think I made this decision lightly? You think I don't know what it costs?" "I think you made it from a throne, sir, not from where we stand."
Ow.
Charles could have him removed, could have him punished, could reassert his authority with a single word. But he didn't. Instead, he asked a question. If there was an attack tomorrow, and you had to choose between saving me or saving my grandchildren, what would you do? Terence didn't hesitate. I'd save the children, sir, even if it meant disobeying a direct order. Even then, Charles stood. Walk to the window. You realize that's treason. No, Your Majesty. It's humanity. Charles turned, looked at this man who had served him for 20 years. This man who was willing to lose everything for a principle. Tell me something, Captain. If I rescind the order, if I make it clear that all lives under my protection matter equally, do you think the other guards will stand down? I know they will, sir. How? Because they're waiting for you to remember who you are. Not a king first, but a father, a grandfather, a man. Charles felt something crack inside him. Not break, but shift. Like a wall he'd built around himself was finally crumbling. He walked back to his desk, picked up the directive, looked at it one last time. Then he tore it in half. Terence's eyes widened. Your Majesty, you're right, Charles said quietly. I made this decision from a throne. I forgot what it's like to be human, to be afraid for the people you love, to value a life not by its title, but by its worth. He dropped the torn pages into a bin. The order is rescinded. Effective immediately. I'll draft a new protocol, one that protects everyone equally. And I'll make sure every guard understands that their duty is to preserve life. All life. Terence looked like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Charles extended his hand. Thank you, Captain, for reminding me what real loyalty looks like. Terence shook his hand. His grip was firm, respectful. But as he turned to leave, Charles stopped him. One more thing, Your Majesty. Your daughter. What's her name? Emma, sir. Charles nodded. I'd like to meet her. Someday, if you'll allow it. Terence's eyes glistened. He nodded, then saluted, and left. Charles stood alone again. But this time, the room didn't feel cold. It felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. He picked up his phone, called his son. It's done, Charles said when he answered. The order is rescinded. You were right. There was silence on the other end. Then, quietly, thank you, Father. I'm sorry for making you choose, for making any of this necessary. You don't need to apologize. You just needed to listen.
Always.
Charles smiled faintly. I'm trying to be better at that. It's all any of us can do. They said goodnight. And for the first time in days, Charles felt like he could breathe. But the story wasn't over yet. Because the next morning, something happened that no one expected. The headline hit the morning news at 6 a.m. Royal Rift. King Charles's secret order put protocol. Over family then changed his mind. Someone had leaked the entire story. Not just the directive, but the internal conflict, the letter from his son, the confrontation, even Captain Terence's role, every detail, every private moment. Now public Charles sat in his study, watching the news on a small television. His hands were clasped tightly, his jaw set. Geoffrey stood nearby, pale and shaking. How did this happen? Charles asked, his voice dangerously quiet. We're investigating, Your Majesty. But the story is already everywhere. Social media, international press. It's spreading too fast to contain. Charles turned off the television. Silence filled the room. He'd expected backlash if the directive ever became public. He'd expected criticism. But he'd also expected to control the narrative. To explain his reasoning? To show that he'd corrected course. Now he had no control at all. His phone buzzed. A text from his son. Short, direct. We need to talk. The children are seeing the headlines. Charles closed his eyes. The children. His grandchildren. They were old enough now to read, to understand, to see their grandfather painted as someone who valued power over people, even though he'd changed. Even though he'd done the right thing in the end. Would they remember that? Or would they only remember the headlines? He stood. Prepare a statement. I'm going to address this publicly. Geoffrey nodded. What do you want to say? Charles paused, thought. Then, the truth. All of it. By noon, Charles stood in front of cameras in the palace's main hall. No script, no teleprompter. Just him and his words. His voice was steady as he began. Good afternoon. By now, many of you have seen the reports about a directive I issued to the royal guard, a directive that prioritized my safety above that of my family. I want to address this directly, because the people of this nation deserve honesty, especially from their king. He paused, took a breath. The directive was real. I signed it, and I did so believing I was protecting the future of the monarchy. I believed that in moments of crisis, the crown itself had to survive above all else. I believed that was my duty. He looked directly into the camera. I was wrong. The room was silent. Reporters leaned forward. Cameras clicked. Forgot that the crown is not a title. It's not a symbol. It's not even a throne. It's the people who wear it, the family who carries it forward, and most importantly, it's the values it represents. Honor, compassion, love. His voice grew quieter, more personal. I have 2 sons. I have grandchildren. And for a brief moment, I prioritized an institution over the people I love most in this world. I justified it as duty, as responsibility, but the truth is, I was afraid of failing, afraid of being the king who let the crown fall, swallowed hard. But a member of my own guard reminded me of something. He reminded me that real strength isn't in putting protocol first. It's in putting humanity first. And he was right. So I rescinded the order. Not because I was pressured, but because it was the right thing to do. He paused again. Let the weight of his words settle. I can't undo the hurt I caused my family. I can't take back the fear I created among the people who serve me. But I can promise you this. From this day forward, I will lead not as a distant king, but as a father, a grandfather, a man who understands that every life matters, equally. He nodded once. Thank you. And then he walked away. No questions. No follow-up. Just his words, left hanging in the air. The response was immediate. Some praised his honesty, called it courageous, a rare moment of vulnerability from a monarch. Others condemned him, said he was weak, that he'd shown indecision, that a king should never apologize. But the loudest voices came from ordinary people, parents, grandparents, people who understood what it meant to love someone more than a job, more than a title. They flooded social media with support. Not for the king, but for the man. By evening, the narrative had shifted. The story was no longer about a cold directive. It was about redemption, about a king who listened, who changed, who chose love over legacy. But not everyone was satisfied. That night, Charles received a visitor. Unannounced, unexpected. It was his older son, heir. He looked tense, uncomfortable. They sat in the same private room where Charles had met his younger son days before. You've made us look weak, the older son said bluntly. The whole family. You aired our private conflict on television? Charles met his gaze. I aired the truth. The truth makes us vulnerable. It makes people question whether we're fit to lead. Perhaps they should question, Charles said calmly. Perhaps we should all question. Power without accountability is tyranny. And I won't be a tyrant. Older son shook his head. You don't understand. The crown survives because people believe in it. Because it's above them. Untouchable. You've made yourself touchable. Human. Good, the word hung between them. His son stared at him. You've changed. Yes, I have. And you think that's a good thing? Charles leaned forward. I think it's the only thing. Because if we don't change, we become relics. Symbols of a past that no one wants to return to. But if we evolve, if we show that we're more than crowns and titles, then maybe, just maybe, we matter. His older son looked away. Conflict played across his face. Tradition versus progress. Duty versus humanity. Finally, he spoke. I don't know if I agree with you, but I respect what you did today. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a start. Charles nodded. That's enough for now. His son left. and Charles was alone once more. He walked to the window, looked out at the city, lights glowing in the distance, lives being lived, families sitting down to dinner, children being tucked into bed. Somewhere out there, Captain Terence was with his daughter. Somewhere, his own grandchildren were processing what they'd seen on the news. And somewhere, the world was deciding what kind of king he would be. Not the kind history books had written about. Not the kind who ruled with an iron fist or distant authority. But the kind who ruled with a heart, the kind who made mistakes and owned them. The kind who chose people over protocol. For the first time in his reign, Charles felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. But just as he was starting to find peace, his phone buzzed again. A message from Geoffrey. "Your Majesty, we've identified the source of the leak. You're not going to believe who it was." Charles felt his stomach drop. Everything he'd just fought for, everything he'd just risked. It all came down to this moment. Who had betrayed him? Charles stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Come to my study now." 10 minutes later, Geoffrey entered. He held a tablet. His hands trembled slightly as he handed it to Charles. On the screen was an email trail, timestamps, attachments, photos of the original directive, copies of the letters, everything. And at the top of the chain was a name that made Charles's blood run cold. It was his own private secretary. Geoffrey Charles looked up slowly. Geoffrey stood before him, pale but steady. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he didn't look away, explained Charles said. His voice was ice. Geoffrey took a breath. "I did it, Your Majesty. I leaked everything." "Why?" "Because you needed to see yourself clearly. And the only way that would happen was if the world saw you first." Charles stood. His chair scraped against the floor. "You betrayed me." "No, sir. I saved you. Saved me." Charles's voice rose. "You humiliated me. You exposed my family. You turned a private matter into a public spectacle, and it worked." Geoffrey's voice was firm now, unshaking. "You rescinded the order. You chose your family. You became the king you were meant to be, and you did it because you had no choice. Because I made sure you had no choice." Charles felt rage building in his chest. This man had served him for years, had been trusted with the most sensitive matters of state, and he'd used that trust as a weapon. "You had no right," Charles said quietly. "You're correct, Your Majesty. I had no right, and I will accept whatever punishment you see fit. Dismissal, prosecution, whatever you deem appropriate. But I won't apologize, because what I did was necessary." Charles stared at him. "You think you know better than a king?" "I think I know you better than you know yourself." The words hit like a slap. Geoffrey continued. "When you signed that directive, I watched you. I saw the hesitation, the doubt. You didn't want to sign it, but you convinced yourself it was duty. I knew that if I came to you privately, you'd rationalize it. You'd defend it. You'd bury it in protocol and tradition. But if the world saw it, if your family saw it, then you'd have to face the truth." Charles felt his hand shaking. "You manipulated me. I forced you to choose. And you chose correctly. That doesn't make it right." Geoffrey nodded. "I know, but it made it happen." Silence filled the room. Charles wanted to scream, to throw Geoffrey out, to have him arrested for treason, but beneath the anger, there was something else. Something he didn't want to admit. Geoffrey was right. If the story hadn't gone public, Charles might have quietly rescinded the order. Might have tried to move on. Might have never truly confronted what he'd done, but the leak had forced him to own it. To speak publicly. To be vulnerable, and in that vulnerability he'd found something he'd lost. His humanity. Charles sank back into his chair. "You've destroyed your career. You know that?" "Yes, Your Majesty. You'll never work in service again. I understand. And you're willing to accept that?" "For this?" Geoffrey smiled faintly. Sadly. "I've served you for 15 years, sir. I've watched you carry burdens no man should carry alone. I've watched you sacrifice sleep, health, happiness, all for duty. And I've admired you for it. but I've also watched you forget who you are beneath the crown. So yes, I'm willing to accept the consequences. Because you deserved to remember. Charles felt his throat tighten. He looked down at the desk. At the torn pieces of the directive still sitting in the bin. You're a fool, he said quietly. Perhaps a loyal fool. Geoffrey's smile grew. I'll take that as a compliment, Your Majesty. Charles looked up, met his eyes. You're dismissed. Effective immediately. Geoffrey nodded. I expected nothing less, but Geoffrey paused. You'll receive a full pension, a letter of recommendation, and my gratitude, however much it's worth. Geoffrey's eyes widened. Your Majesty, you deserve more than I can give, Charles said. You risked everything for me. Not for the crown, for me. And that's a rare kind of loyalty. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that acts because it must. He stood, extended his hand. Thank you, Geoffrey. For seeing what I couldn't? Geoffrey shook his hand. His grip was firm, respectful, and when he left, he did so with his head high. Charles sat alone once more. But this time, the solitude felt different, not isolating. But clarifying, he picked up his phone, called his younger son. I wanted you to hear it from me, Charles said. Geoffrey was the leak. He's been dismissed. There was a pause. How do you feel about that? Charles thought. Grateful, angry, confused, all of it. It sounds about right. Charles smiled faintly. I also wanted to ask you something. Would you and the children come to the palace this weekend? I'd like to spend time together. No cameras. No formality. Just family. His son's voice softened. We'd like that. Tell them I'm sorry. For everything. I'll tell them myself, but I wanted you to know first. They already know, Father. They saw your speech. My daughter said you looked like a real person for the first time. Charles felt his eyes sting. I'm trying to be. You're doing just fine. They said goodbye. And Charles set the phone down. He walked to the window one last time. The city was quiet now, peaceful tomorrow. There would be more headlines, more opinions, more people deciding what kind of king he was. But tonight, he was just a man, a father, a grandfather, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. He turned off the lights, left the study, and as he walked down the long, empty corridor toward his chambers, he realized something. The crown didn't make him strong. The people he loved did, and that was a lesson worth learning, even if it had taken a scandal to teach him. But as he reached his door, one final question lingered. What would happen next? Because the world was watching now, and not everyone would be pleased with the king he was becoming. The weekend arrived quietly. No fanfare, no press, just family. Charles's younger son arrived with his wife and children on Saturday morning. The palace staff had been instructed to give them privacy. No guards in the hallways. No attendants hovering. Just space to be themselves. Charles met them at a side entrance. He wore a simple sweater and slacks. No formal attire. No medals or sashes. Just clothes. His grandchildren ran to him, hugged him, asked if they could see the gardens. And for the first time in years, Charles said yes, without checking a schedule. They spent the morning walking the grounds. The children asked questions about the flowers, the statues, the history of the palace. Charles answered each one, not as a king reciting facts, but as a grandfather sharing stories. At one point, his granddaughter stopped by a fountain. She looked up at him with serious eyes. Grandpa, are you sad about what happened? Charles knelt down to her level. What do you mean, sweetheart? The news said you made a mistake, and that people were angry. He nodded slowly. I did make a mistake, and some people were angry, but I fixed it, and I learned from it. What did you learn? Charles smiled. That the people I love are more important than anything else. Even my job. She thought about this. Then hugged him. I'm glad. He held her close. And in that moment, he felt something shift inside him. A weight lifting. A clarity settling. This was what mattered. Not the headlines. Not the protocols. Not the opinions of strangers. That afternoon, they had lunch together. Simple food. Sandwiches and tea. They sat in a sunlit room, talking and laughing. Charles's son shared stories about the children's school adventures. His wife talked about a charity project she was working on. The children argued playfully about who had seen the biggest. Pigeon in the garden, it was ordinary, unremarkable, and it was perfect. Later, after the children had gone to play, Charles and his son sat alone on a terrace overlooking the grounds. "You seem different," his son said. "I feel different." Charles nodded. "I've spent my whole life trying to live up to an idea. The perfect king. The unshakable leader. The man who never doubted. But that's not real. And it's exhausting." His son smiled. "Welcome to being human. It's terrifying. It's also freeing." Charles looked at him. "How did you learn that so young?" "I had no choice. I knew I'd never be king. So I had to figure out who I was without a crown. Turns out, it's easier that way." Charles laughed quietly. "Maybe you're the smart one. We were both just doing our best." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play in the distance. Then his son spoke again. "What happens now?" "With the guards. The protocol? All of it. I'm rewriting it," Charles said, "with input from the guards themselves, and from you, and from anyone else who wants to have a say, because I can't do this alone. I never could. That's a big change. It's the right change." His son nodded. "I'm proud of you, Father." Charles felt his chest tighten. "Thank you. That means more than you know."
Yes.
As the sun began to set, Charles walked his family to their car. The children hugged him goodbye, promised to visit again soon. His son shook his hand, then pulled him into an embrace. "You're going to be okay," his son whispered. Charles nodded. "So are we," and he meant it. As the car drove away, Charles stood at the entrance, watching until it disappeared from view. Then he turned and walked back inside. The palace felt different now. Not smaller, but less intimidating. Like it was a home instead of a fortress. He returned to his study, sat at his desk, and began drafting the new protocol. Not alone. He'd already scheduled meetings with Captain Terrence and other senior guards. He'd invited his sons to contribute. He'd even reached out to security experts outside the palace walls. It would take time. There would be disagreements, challenges, setbacks. But he was ready, because he'd learned something through all of this. Something that changed everything. A king's strength didn't come from being untouchable. It came from being willing to be touched, to be challenged, to be changed. The crown was a symbol. But symbols only mattered if they represented something real. Something human and humanity, with all its flaws and doubts and messy complications. It's the only thing worth protecting. As Charles wrote, his phone buzzed. A message from Captain Terrence. "Your Majesty, the guards wanted me to pass along a message. We're with you. All of us. Thank you for listening." Charles smiled. Typed back, "Thank you for speaking." He set the phone down and continued writing. Hours passed. The palace grew quiet. The city outside dimmed as night fell, but Charles kept working. Not out of obligation, not out of duty, but out of hope. Hope that he could build something better. Something that honored both tradition and progress. Something that protected not just the crown, but the people who wore it, and the people who served it, and the people who believed in it. When he finally finished the first draft, it was past midnight. He leaned back in his chair. Exhausted but satisfied, he thought about everything that had happened. The directive, the letters, the confrontation, the leak, the speech. The reconciliation, it had been a storm. But he'd weathered it, and on the other side, found something he hadn't expected himself. Not the king he thought he had to be, but the king he actually was. Flawed, human, uncertain, but trying, always trying. And maybe that was enough. He stood, turned off the lights, and walked through the quiet palace toward his chambers. As he passed a mirror in the hallway, he paused, looked at his reflection. For the first time in years, he recognized the man staring back. Not a symbol, not a title, just a man. A father, a grandfather, a leader, someone who'd made mistakes and owned them, someone who'd chosen love over legacy, someone who'd learned that real strength wasn't in being perfect, it was in being real. Charles smiled at his reflection, then continued down the hall. Tomorrow, the world would keep spinning. The headlines would keep coming. The challenges would keep mounting. But tonight, he was at peace because he'd finally learned the most important lesson King could learn. The crown didn't make the man made the crown. And as long as he remembered that, he'd be exactly the king his people needed. Not perfect, but human. And in the end, that was the only thing that truly mattered. The palace stood silent in the night, a symbol of history, of tradition, of power. But inside, quiet revolution had begun, not with swords or speeches, but with a single choice. The choice to put people first, and that choice changed everything.